morning, Your Worship and Councillors. So today we're here to talk about the freedom of expression policy. So what are we going to discuss today? Basically why we've got a draft policy in the first place, how do we end up here, what that draft policy looks like, and the feedback we've received from the union, from the Free Speech Union, and also to seek your direction. So as a bit of background, obviously there was a decision made around an event previously. There was some dialogue engaged in with the Free Speech Union, which led to this agreement around us hosting a workshop for them to talk to you all about freedom of expression and for us to develop a policy for your consideration. So that's why we've got a draft policy. That draft policy was basically framed up around surmising the legal obligations that council has and kind of putting those into a one-stop shop kind of place that's principles based. So staff, elected members, whoever's making decisions that may have impacts on freedom of expression don't have to go looking through every single piece of legislation, trying to find out every single piece of case law and the intricacies of all of it. They can go to a first principles based document, and then if there are further questions or further nuances about any particular circumstance, then they can seek further guidance if it's not sufficient. We've provided that to the Free Speech Union. They commended that draft on the basis that it provides a strong foundation, and they provided feedback around further strengthening that in order to enhance its the outcomes that they are looking for as a Free Speech Union, as an advocate in that space. So ultimately, there are kind of three broad options for council in terms of consideration. And we'd like to seek some direction from you before we bring a final paper to council for a decision. There's what we've got on there in that continuum is the less option, which is you don't need to have a policy. There has been no policy for decades. Ever since the Bill of Rights Act has been enacted, council has not had a policy. The rules around freedom of expression and the law are already there. They are already present. They already present the backstop. There is the Human Rights Commission that people can appeal to. There are a number of processes for people to be able to go through if they believe that their rights have been violated or there are any issues. That's the one end of the spectrum, is basically rely on the existing law and rely on the courts to continue doing what they do in terms of making rulings around this particular matter. And then there's the more option, which is you'd go through and you'd create a far stronger direction down to the procedural level. You'd articulate in any given circumstance what the procedure would look like. That's sort of down to appeals processes and things, which is kind of the direction the union would like everyone to go to, is a really strong kind of black and white process for every sort of conceivable matter that you may come up with. And then in the middle between those two positions is the policy that we've drafted, which takes the law with the no policy position, provides a sort of a guiding and interpretation document that acts as a little bit of an umbrella, if it were to be adopted, would act as an umbrella over the top of our existing processes, our existing procedures, and help when there are conflicts around interpretation that may have some impacts on freedom of expression. So people can go, oh, what should we turn our minds to when we're considering venue bookings? What are the principles we need to think about when when someone requests to book a venue? On what grounds can that kind of thing be postponed or the venue changed or cancelled? What are the grounds that can happen? Rather than them having to go to the case law, find that piece of case law, read through it, and then go, okay, now I've found out what the case law says, now I can figure that out. They can simply pull the policy up and go, okay, these are the things I need to consider, and if I need more help, I'll ask for legal advice. So in terms of seeking direction from you all, we'd like to know which kind of way you would like to go. We've got this draft policy. There needs to be a policy for your consideration. So I guess there's a question there around in terms of direction if you would want to do more, and also a question around for direction if you would prefer to be in a space where there is no policy at all and we simply rely on, as many organisations have done for many years, on simply just the law. And then in any given circumstance, individuals will need to come to and seek legal advice on the matter if we think it has implications for the Bill of Rights Act. Happy to take any questions.
I'd really like to see us get this I'd really like to see us keep this policy at a high level. That's where I believe governance should be is at a helicopter view. If we need to, then the details comes into procedures and things like that, but the policy should be at a very high level as an overarching governance level document. We shouldn't be getting into the weeds and into the details of the exact this and that. And at the end of the day, the law overarches everything else, regardless of whatever we might have written into a policy. I would hate to see us get into detail that could actually hamstring our entity and our activities. I just think I like the draft that's there, that are the words that you guys have put together. I don't agree with the writing in red. I think that's getting into too much detail from having a look at what's written in red, and that's my view at this point, and that would be the direction of travel I'd like us to take.
Anyone else? Duncan?
Yeah, through the chair. The policy reads roughly well enough, but going further than that, I think it's the application of the policy which makes all the difference in my mind. Because, for example, the Stop CoGov thing, which stirred this whole thing up, I think there was nothing particularly contrary to that policy which resulted in that meeting going ahead, and yet I'm not completely satisfied that everything went the way it should have and could have, and that's really down to the application of a culture of openness to this would have had an end result, whether you got that policy written or not. And if I can put this to you, Mr. Chair, I know the policy states that council will not censor or suppress ideas simply because they are offensive or upsetting to some, and that's I agree with that. I think we all agree with that. Yet, last year, council amended its standing orders to require that no elected member can table an item for the agenda without another member seconding it first. Now, this means that if the rest of you find my perspective offensive or upsetting, or even if you're afraid of getting on the wrong side of another councillor who might also find that, you can prevent it from even being heard in these chambers. So my question is, does this policy apply only to the public, or are elected members also entitled to freedom of expression in these chambers?
Kylie?
Could I just come back to the why that we have this document in front of us? So there was an incident that occurred last year, and part of the discussions and the follow-up from that incident was that we would create a policy, or consider creating a policy as a council, and that's why we have this document in front of us. So it's now up to us to consider, and our job at the moment as part of this workshop is to consider, will we have a policy or will we not have a policy, and at what level we want that policy to be at. Have I got that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. So the purpose of this workshop is to seek that direction around a direction of travel before we present a item for formal consideration by council, whether that's for adoption or a consideration to not adopt something. That's a matter for yourselves to decide. We are simply seeking of how far would you like to go with regards to this policy and with regards to this obligation. To speak to the procedural matters, we have existing procedures across a number of things, including venue booking. The intent of such a policy at the level that it's set is to provide that additional guidance for the avoidance of doubt when people are considering venue bookings, for example, so that there is no doubt in the minds of those who are assessing the booking as to what their obligations are. For example, if any event were to go ahead that had large numbers of people, there may be a requirement for additional security regardless of the content of it. It could be a popular singer, there's not really any issue, but they require additional security and additional crowd management because it's hundreds of people. In that instance, if the event organisers could not provide that, the event would be cancelled on the grounds of physical safety. That's irrespective of what's being said by the individual or what's happening. And those are the same grounds which basically have to apply to anyone, and they're the same grounds that apply to speech. If an event is to go ahead, then depending on what's happening, depending on the number of people, depending on the likelihood of there being some sort of security concerns or threat to physical safety, those are the only grounds in which an event can actually be cancelled, and that's outlined in the case law. So it must be principally and only focused on the physical safety at the event or of the event occurring. That's outlined very clearly in the case that relates to the Auckland facilities.
Health and safety is over and above everything else.
Specifically, it's physical safety. That's the court's current position on the matter, is that it's physical safety, because obviously health and safety can relate to other forms of safety, including mental health. The view of the courts is that this is very narrowly interpreted to be physical safety. So it's around likelihood of damage to property or violence, those types of things.
Cool. Duncan?
Chair, so subjective, in other words, I would say. But I just two things. We're not planning to consult the public with this, are we?
Through the chair. So in terms of those that spectrum up there up on the board with the presentation, the current draft policy, on the basis that it is just a surmising of the law and the surmising of our legal obligations to help then guide decision makers, we do not believe that there would be a requirement to consult on the draft as it is written. It doesn't change any of our existing procedures or policies or practices. It merely plays that guiding hand. However, if we went down an approach for more details, stronger principles that did have very clear changes to be made to our procedures and processes that would have impact on a large number of communities, then we would probably be in a space of requiring engagement and consultation with the community if we went with that much stronger rather than a higher level governance document. No,
I'm not particularly advocating for that, but might I suggest if this is going to get any traction internally, I actually believe going through worked examples with staff responsible for this sort of stuff, that would be a practical way of nutting out, because that's where it matters, the application of this. It's one thing to have a policy in the background that people might occasionally refer to, but it's the application. The devil is in the detail, which matters most here. And I think working through some examples, tricky ones, challenging ones with staff would be beneficial. Do you agree?
Kylie?
So it's our job just to set the policy. It's then up to the staff to enact the policy. That's not our job. We employ Julie, and then she employs her staff, and it's up to them how they enact the policy. Our job is to set the policy at the appropriate tone and at the appropriate level, not to get into that level of detail.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to go through I think there's a bit of appetite just to create a draft policy at this stage, and do you want to take us through that process?
So through the chair, we uploaded to Diligent for you the draft with some changes in red related to the feedback from the Free Speech Union. That draft is sitting at that higher level. It stays out of the sort of the weeds of every individual process we have. And to Councillor Campbell's point, if council decided at a later date that there was specific issues in specific areas around process, or that the process should be more robust in those areas, then council could direct changes to those procedures and practices in order to more further align them with the policy, for example, if there was a belief that they are out of alignment for whatever reason. However, council, obviously being an organisation that intends to obey the law at all times, I don't believe officers would willfully misinterpret our procedures and practices in a manner that are inconsistent with the law. So, but if elected members did believe there was an issue, that could be raised to the council and corrections could be made. So in terms of making the policy, and in terms of direction from you today, the draft that you have, we've heard some feedback around the items in red, potentially being too far. I suppose what we can do is we could present you a draft with those items still in at the council meeting. So in terms of next steps, we could present you a item with those items in red still in on the 27th of May for your consideration as a council collectively, and you could then direct us at that time to remove them, or we could leave them, keep them on file, keep them as a note in the report, but remove them from the draft for adoption, depending on the direction you provide us today.
That's what I'd like to see. That's
Me
my
too.
opinion.
Agree.
Councillor Shepherd.
Yeah, I agree. I just note in the draft that we've got here, though, one of the items in red that you're suggesting stays in, is that correct, staying in, refers to, if you go to 12B in red, cancellation of an event may be justified if it is reasonable and proportionate response, legitimate concerns such as health and safety. Is that the correct wording then, if we're referring to...
That's the wording that's also been provided from the Free Speech Union. So but we could amend that to be very specific around physical health and safety.
I'd really rather stick to
Yep.
what we have control over. You know, the physical safety, we've got no control over how somebody interprets it, you know, and how their frame of mind is. So I'd like to remove the health aspect of it and just stick to physical safety if we can.
So through the chair, just for the sake of clarity, I'm hearing that we'd like to be presented with an option that has the red items removed from the report, and return back to that kind of original draft that we sent to the Free Speech Union. We can present you with an item that has none of those red parts inside of it, for your consideration at the council meeting on the 27th.
Oh,
Councillor Campbell.
can I just ask what in particular we have against the lines in red? Are they what's wrong with them?
If I go to the item under item 7, if I read the previous sentence prior to the red, in a democratic society, individuals must be free to explore, question and debate without fear of censorship or suppression. There's no need for the council will not censor or suppress ideas simply because they are offensive or upsetting to some. It's already covered in the previous sentence. It doesn't need to be there. The same as the other statements.
And to Kylie's other point, keeping it high level, I think is a better option. And we've got legislation and case law to guide us. If the policy is inadequate, you can advance that to the next step. So I think we'd be limiting ourselves, as Kylie mentioned, if we are too specific, because we already have legislation in place that covers this. So we're just reinventing the wheel, or trying to, with legislation that would supersede this anyway.
Well, through the chair, I suppose I get back to my point before. Is it's a lot of this stuff is subjective as anything, and it's the application which matters. And in terms of our concern of policy or not, I think what we should be concerned with if a policy is going to actually be implemented effectively. So, I would suggest included in this policy would be regular refresher training courses of staff to bed in its application. I think that's entirely not unreasonable to have as part of a policy, because again, this stuff like this just gets filed away and forgotten. I know the policies can do that, and I think this is quite important.
That level of detail is not meant to be in a policy. ChatGPT will tell you that, Duncan, if you pop it in there. It'll give you the answer. Yeah, your AI question earlier. It'll give you the answer on good governance. At what level you're meant to be at.
again, good governance is a subjective exercise in itself. So we can debate that if you like. But yeah, again, my concern is the application of this, because that's what really matters. In terms of the writing in red, I think that example you put in, number 7, okay, you might argue it's not absolutely necessary. The ones in 12, if you're talking about deleting them as well, they seem to add to the document, as far as I can tell. Notwithstanding is the application of this which matters the most. So I don't have a particular problem with them being included.
The thing is, though, we're talking about this clause 12 in red, decisions must be informed by relevant case law. Are we asking our staff to look up case law every time they've got to make a decision? No, we just need a guiding document to start off with, and then it can be advanced to case law or the legislation. We just have to give that high level guidance of how we want things to play out.
Christine?
Isn't it our intent that needs to be reflected in the policy? And I think it's there. Well, my intent would be not to stop anything unless we had absolutely no choice. If we're abiding by democracy, it's not our place to make a decision about whether someone's views are right or wrong. It's about allowing them to do what they need to do. It's none of our business, and it's an absolutely wrong thing to do. So as long as the intent is in the policy, then it's up to the consideration of whoever is given the final decision, which is not an easy one. But I, from the discussion when it happened, I think our intent should be to facilitate whatever happens by way of our policy.
Very good. Nick?
I just want to add in, when I asked the team to go away and do this work, I gave them some writing instructions around trying to keep this as simple as possible. This is not an area that we've had policy in before, and I've seen situations where we've tried to get a little bit too expansive at the start of something new, and unforeseen consequences come along. That's why the team, I think, has found the right balance between articulating something in plain English so that staff, you as governance and the community understand what we're trying to achieve, the intent, as you've quite rightly pointed to, but not gone so much further that we create potentially those unforeseen consequences. Like all policy that you have, this is something that will be under review, and if you find that it's not working for whatever reason, then it will be tweaked. And I guess just to reiterate the earlier point, Julie as CE will take no doubt a range of ways of conveying this information out to her staff and how she expects that to be implemented. What I would also say is that will change over time as our experience working through how we look at a submission that might be considered to be controversial is dealt with, or how we undertake a particular community event. Policy is always evolving. The intent is the critical thing. And as I say, this is a very much a new area for us, and we want to keep it simple to start with.
Okay. You're right. Thank.
Yeah, just so to be clear, are we including the red or not?
No.
Or we're not? None of it. All gone.
Read the whole thing. So, well, my read of the room. My read of the room is that the majority of councillors have given staff direction to present a policy on the 27th of May that does not include the red words. That is what I have heard from all the councillors that have spoken, apart from Councillor Campbell.
Okay.
Well, all right, if that's the majority of opinion in the room, it seems to be. Again, I reiterate, it's the application that matters, but and I'll throw this Lastly, Your Worship, I'll throw back at you. So I didn't get an answer to the question before. If this policy does value diversity of opinions in the chambers, will Council now amend standing orders to allow elected members to table items without requiring ideological or whatever pre-clearance from a seconder?
Standing orders included in this policy?
Through the chair, this document would guide the interpretation of the existing standing orders. Doesn't seek to change the existing standing orders. If we remember back to when the Free Speech Union was presenting on the matter, the issue of standing orders was raised, and as the Free Speech Union pointed out, that nearly all councils require a seconder. Some require a 1/3 majority. Not majority, but 1/3 of the council to agree to a notice of motion, and that's principally around the respecting of the time of the council. We would all love to be able to debate rigorously all the ideas that come before council and debate them until their logical conclusions, but unfortunately council does not have the time to be able to do that on every matter. And so I guess the position of the Free Speech Union took was that council needs to be somewhat selective with its time. So there's a question there. Again, it's entirely to council to adjust its standing orders if it seeks that it's necessary to do so. But the Free Speech Union did provide a clear steer that the idea of a seconder in the case of standing orders is not necessarily abhorrent to the principles of freedom of expression.
Cool. Thank you, Andrew.
Through the chair,
Councillor Weston, sorry.
Chair,
Oh, you first. Yep.
I'd better respond to that, Andrew, since you pushed back on it. I mean, I kind of think what you're saying is beside the point. Some other councils may, I haven't thoroughly examined every other council, and I recognise some other councils have different policies, but the way it functions here is to quench freedom of expression for elected members. The Free Speech Union missed the point, I believe. I actually think they completely missed the point, and it's obvious, should be obvious, certainly to people at this table, what the effect of it is in here, and if you're not, well, that's on you.
Yvonne?
Well, I think it's on you not understanding the process, and I certainly agree that it needs to have that seconder to stop frivolous waste of people's time sitting around this table. And the other point I wanted to make was I think we had some really good learnings last year in that practical sense. We've had some great information. So at an operational level, I believe the team are now more aware of process. And again, we're just doing the governance thing here, and I totally agree with there's no point having the red lines in there.
Cool. Okay. Andrew, thank you. You go away and work on that, bring that policy to council. Draft policy.
Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Yep.
And we will bring that to you on the 27th for your consideration, for the formal consideration by council. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Workshop closed.